Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. High Point University, the premier life skills university, focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. And Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Welcome to the special virtual edition of Carolina Business Review. Normally, we're in a studio and we talk about issues here in the Carolinas. This time, we're not in the studio, but we will talk about issues here in the Carolinas. This one is an original panel about journalism, but now, how does that craft play into what is going on in the national healthcare emergency going on now in this country? We will start in just a moment.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Ferrel Guillory, professor of the UNC Hussman School of Journalism and Media, Tony Mecia, editor of the Charlotte Ledger, Darci Strickland, content manager and senior journalist at WLTX-TV, and PJ Browning, publisher of the Post and Courier.
Welcome again to our virtual Carolina Business Review. Joining us now, four experts in the area of journalism and the media. First of all, Ferrel Guillory, professor at UNC Hussman School of Journalism and Media. Tony Mecia, the editor of the Charlotte Ledger. Darci Strickland, content manager, senior journalist at WLTX in Columbia. And PJ Browning, publisher of the Post and Courier in Charleston. You all welcome. I am honored to be on a panel with you, and that's not just hyperbole. I truly do respect all the work that you've all done. PJ, I want to start with you. We're gonna unpack this idea of what is modern journalism and what is the modern media now, but we can't do it without this idea of the black swan event that we're up against now, the COVID-19. So in the midst of this national public health emergency, what is the media's role? PJ?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I would say that, we play a vital role in the coverage of this healthcare crisis. I'm sure other publishers are seeing this too, but our traffic has absolutely skyrocketed, and especially around all things coronavirus or health coverage. So it has been absolutely imperative that we cover it, and certainly for our publication, we have repurposed some journalists that maybe were in sports and in entertainment, where those areas have declined right now, rightly so, because less events going on. And we've doubled down on the coverage that we're able to provide. So we feel like it's very important not only to cover the coronavirus, but make sure that our residents of South Carolina know what's going on, know the latest news, and can protect themselves as best as possible. But, we're a part of the community, and so it's very important for us to really double down on that coverage.
Anyone? Darci, Tony, Ferrel?
Yeah, I would agree with her on that. The entire time that we've been covering COVID-19 here at WLTX, it's been facts over fear. People are scared to the point that they're paralyzed trying to analyze what's happening with the coronavirus. And so every day it is our job to make sure that we're not only equipping people with the information that they need in order to make the right decisions for themselves and their families, but we're also giving them just a little dose of good news in that. So many people have reached out to us and said, I just don't know what to do. I just don't know if this is the new normal. I just don't want this to be my new normal. So in the midst of making sure that we get all the information out there, we're also very careful to make sure that we get the video in of a 12-year-old's birthday party that ends up being all the neighbors getting in their cars and putting their windows down, putting balloons out the window and saying, "Happy birthday, Michaela," and just, making sure that we get some of that good news in so that our viewers know when they turn on WLTX, it is not going to be a death count.
Sure. I promise I'm going to get to Tony, but Ferrel, this idea of, you've seen a few of these crises, not just 9/11 or the 2008, 2009, or in the 1970s or 91 or whenever that is, but how is the media's role different? Is it different now than it was during other national and global crises?
Well, let me begin, Chris, by first saying I'm honored to be here and thank you for inviting me. I begin discussions of the media with my students and other audiences with the headline, "Media are plural." That's actually grammatically correct, as well as the situation. And so different levels of media have different responsibilities and different focus. So the national media, the New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, their job is to do national coverage, international coverage, to hold the president and Congress accountable, to do the big picture, and to frankly examine the politics situation. The state and local level media, you have just heard two good journalists describe what they've been doing, focusing on their community, what's working, what's not, what do people need to know to survive and to thrive as best they can. So it's very much consumer-oriented, personal-oriented coverage, much less political, much less governmental. And then there's the emerging online media. As you know, I'm one of the founders of Education NC, and there are others in this space that address a particular community. And in our case, it's the community of educators, policymakers, philanthropists, those with a stake in and a concern for schools, community colleges, and universities. And so the online media tends to focus on a particular community and to keep that community going. And I'd be interested in how Tony, as he has launched the Charlotte Ledger, how he thinks of his role in responding to the crisis now.
Tony, that's your intro. Tony, let's unmute you.
And things that look like facts. We're drowning in just a whole lot of information. And so I think the role of the media, what it can really do is it can provide that context and it can provide that reliable source of information. And I think we're everybody on this panel has seen that there's really a thirst for reliable information, not just, I mean, one of the great things about the age that we're in is that everybody kind of has a voice and you can hear everybody's opinions, and that's great for democracy. However, it also can lead to a lot of rumor mongering, a lot of things that aren't really true. And so our role is really to try to distill that and say, listen, we're giving you what's reliable and what you can trust. And that's always been a selling point for media. But I think especially nowadays in this environment we're in with so much social media and so many rumors and things like that, that we can really take the principles that we've always applied, which is actually going and talking to policymakers, getting actual answers, asking them the hard questions, reflecting our community. I mean, these are all old school journalism ideas that are now being applied in a new era.
Well, and let me ask any of you this, because you've all articulated it well. You're veterans of the industry, have done well, are doing well. This idea, though, I'm not going to say a crusty old journalist, but I had a journalist that has spent many decades in this and said, one of the things that really gripes me is how journalism gets lumped in as the media. What is the difference between journalism and the media? Not to get too existential here, but what is the difference? Is there a difference?
Well, As the faculty member of a school that is called the School of Journalism and Media, I guess I ought to figure that out. The way I think about it is journalism is the profession. When I first started teaching at Carolina, a friend of mine told me that my job was to keep the ism alive in journalism. The professionalism, the devotion to fact-based reporting, integrity, checking, giving voice to the voiceless, holding power to account. The media, to me, signifies the array of technological devices, channels, transmission, so that it's the various ways that journalists, professional journalists, practice and disseminate what they learn. And so television is media, as Tony said, online, the proliferation of online discussion groups, media, newspapers are media. Where we're having difficulty in today's environment is that there's this proliferation of discussion. Some of it is journalism and some of it is just sounding off, or as Tony said, rumor mongering, false or fake news. And so we are really challenged today to be critical thinkers, critical consumers of media. And what's really important is for citizens to learn to subscribe to, read a variety of publications, news organizations that provide them with professional journalism who are sense makers in this chaotic world.
And so PJ and Darci, can you tease out the difference between what the craft and the ism in journalism is from media broadly?
In my opinion, I think that the media is the vehicle and the journalism is the fuel. So regardless of what you're driving, if you put bad gas in it, you're not going to go very far. So as journalists, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're always putting good fuel in our vehicle, whether that media is on air, whether it's print, whether it's online. Clumping what we do into calling it just media is like saying, your high grade fuel is a Porsche. Well, those are two very different things.
I would agree with you guys. I personally, I think our team would say that we don't see media and journalism as the same thing. Journalism is the art of being a journalist, the professionalism of being a journalist. And, you ask what's the difference in covering this crisis versus crisis that have happened in the past. And it is the proliferation of online. And, some people group online as media. Well, I can be a troll online. I can be a lot of things, and that can be defined as media because people are not sure what to trust. And I think it'll be interesting coming out of this crisis that I do think, from what I'm hearing, newspaper publishers, and just because I'm on the newspaper side, I'm sure it's true for TV, but trusted sources, I think you're going to see that our traffic is really skyrocketing because people do trust us and they're coming back to say, okay, I don't want to just read about this. I want to read from somebody that I know is on the front lines and really a professional in this. I think that's a big difference in what we're covering today versus the past.
And let me bring up the idea of the coverage of it. Even trusted, to use your term, PJ, even trusted news sources have a temptation of words matter, and I know you all believe that. But how do you separate out the hyperbole, the excessiveness, the immoderate type of adjectives that are used to describe clearly a tough situation in the case of COVID-19? How do you not make it more sensational than it needs to be? And you balance the idea of using the correct words that don't already incite a headline or don't try to grab people, but is still responsible journalism.
I mean, I would say that, we're very, very careful with headlines because I think Darci mentioned this too, but it is not our job to incite fear in our community. What our job is to inform them and help them get through this crisis. And, fear is not going to get us anywhere. so we're very, very careful to make sure that we don't want to anybody walk away and think that we've sensationalized anything. And, I think the difference with us from a local media standpoint is people see me in the grocery store. They see our journalists at church. We are a part of their community, and they are trusting us because we're on those front lines making sure we have the information for them. So I think it's an interesting time for us, and I think media may come out of this even defined a little bit differently than journalism because of this crisis and how we're covering it.
So Tony, how do you fight against the temptation of not using a sensational headline because it will draw readers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are different, and this is one of the things that's really interesting about this time that we're in, is that everybody has different, there are a bunch of different business models emerging now. And so, a business model that is driven by just looking at the number of clicks or trying to get as many eyeballs as possible, that a lot of times can create some really bad incentives. And so I think what you're seeing in the industry, you're seeing a move toward not just this advertising approach where you need a whole bunch of people, you need to get as many eyeballs as you can so you can sell advertising against it, but you're also seeing a model that's shifting a lot more towards subscriber revenue or membership revenue, in which people who appreciate that approach, that's not a sensationalistic approach, that they can pay for that. And that it might not be for everybody, but you're starting to see, I think, a fragmentation. You've been seeing it for years, really, of different media, going in different directions and trying out different business models, not all of which depend upon, inciting fear or triggering the dopamine, to get you to click, your mouse on the headline. So you're seeing a bunch of different approaches on that. I mean, people go different ways, and I think we can all, point to examples of coverage of this where it's been a little bit sensationalistic or over the top or fear mongering, or irresponsible. But there are, I think, a lot of models also that are moving toward a direction that are saying, look, there is an audience for people who don't want it sensationalized, who just want, the facts presented in context.
Let me add on to that, Chris, if I may. We have a public health crisis, as you've said, which is leading to an economic crisis. People are losing jobs, businesses are either collapsing or suspending operations. We've also got a journalism crisis. Even before COVID-19, the news industry collectively had lost 25% of its journalists since 2008. The newspaper sector employment is down nearly 50% since 2008. And the COVID-19 crisis is leading to a parallel crisis in the world of journalism. Just as newspapers like the Charleston Post and Courier are needed the most, it's the economic travail is getting worse. And it's a paradox of our time. And we know from research both at UNC Chapel Hill and the Pew Research Center that we have news deserts all across the region, all across the country. We have ghost newspapers that come out in paper but hardly have any news in them. Mm-hmm. And what we're going to go through in the next few months is going to make the base of the economic base of newspapers even weaker. I was struck, emotionally struck, in recent days that the two cities in which I have practiced journalism, New Orleans and Raleigh, the newspapers in both cities in the last week or so before we tape this show, mm-hmm. sent out emails asking its readers not for subscriptions, not for advertising, but for donations, charitable donations, contributions to keep the enterprise alive. And this is a sign of our times that is getting worse because of the pandemic we're going through.
You know, thank you, Ferrel. And Darci, I want to come back to you, but PJ, I know the Post and Courier has done that. Yes. If you want to continue with good news to help us and support us. So this is not going to be the right way or the respectful way to ask, but do print dailies like the PNC, is it a bit like whistling past the graveyard when you know at some point we're going to have to relent that we can't keep maintaining something that has profit margins that become smaller and smaller? And I don't want to throw you under the bus here, PJ, but how do you think about this internally?
Yeah, you know, we're very fortunate, and I've been in this business for 36 years and worked on the public side for many of those years, the last 7.5 having worked for private organizations. So, you know, the challenge is you have to come off the profit margin. And that's hard for some companies to do, but to sustain journalism, and you have to shift your business model. And we've heard pieces and parts of it this morning, but you know, I've got to get off the programmatic drug online. It's hard, but it does drive revenue, but it's not the long tail. So I would tell you that, you know, as a leader in this industry, we have to be willing to change that business model. And it is a sustainable journalism model. We're absolutely going after an audience first instead of an advertising first. We love that we're a vehicle for advertisers. We want to continue to do that. However, we know that advertising, it's changing dramatically with online. And so right now we are very focused on audience first. And we have, for the COVID-19, you know, the local media association came out with funding that helps if people want to help fund journalists in this time that we've seen, just like in the recession, you know, it's 30% advertising drops. We don't think that it's going to be as long, certainly, as the recession, but it is an opportunity for people that enjoy journalism and want to help out. They can certainly donate to that fund just during this time that we're seeing advertising declines.
Darci, you know, electronic media is not immune to this, of course, and I know you know that. As you do your job and do your craft, and as professional as you are for as long as you've done it, and you look over your shoulder and you see some other maybe stations in the Columbia market or radio stations doing things, and you know they're all under pressure from headcount and profitability the same way, how do you maintain the enthusiasm, the focus on the professionalism, and doing as your cohorts on this panel just described, practicing the craft?
I will say this, I am very lucky to work for WLTX. I have never in 20 years plus of working at the station ever felt like I was forced to do something that didn't feel right. I've lived in Columbia for more than 20 years, so this is home for me now. Originally from the Low Country, but this is home. So I do my job responsibly because I am responsible to the folks that I see every day or saw every day in the grocery store and at church and when I drop my kids off at school. We do what feels right here. We do what is right here. And it has been our mantra from the first day that we started covering COVID-19 that we put facts above fear. It is not our job, as we mentioned just moments ago, to incite fear. It is our job to equip our viewers with the information they need in order to make the right decisions for themselves and their families. And it's also our responsibility to listen to our viewers. And when they say, listen, I have had enough of this, you guys are scaring me, we hear that and then we do it different because you're not doing a service to your community if you're not listening to your viewers.
So in a final couple minutes we have, Ferrel, I want to come back to you and Tony. This idea, we haven't used the term fake news yet in this dialogue. And literally we have about a minute and a half left. Is fake news finally deployed as far as it's going to be and no longer is that specter of a good journalist? Or does the blogging and fake news continue to expand?
Well, it's hard to say. During the COVID-19 crisis, we've seen some proliferation of fake news, you know, miracle cures and other items floating through the internet. I hate to say it this way, but A lot of pressure is on the news consumer. We've got to, as a society, honor professional journalism. Journalism is important for our democracy. It's important for our capitalism. And the decline that I enumerated previously is disturbing. We also have to recognize that alternatives are emerging, like the Charlotte Ledger that Tony is producing, like Education NC, like North Carolina Health News that Rose Hoban is running, or Carolina Public Press that Angie Newsom has established. It's going to be important for citizens to develop different kind of news consuming habits, of consuming an array of publications and online and electronic news dissemination.
Okay, I hate to cut you off, Ferrel, because I know there's a lot more to talk. And Tony, I didn't give you a chance to say anything pithy here in the last couple seconds, but thank you. Tony, thank you. Ferrel, thank you. Darci, thank you. And PJ, certainly thank you for joining us. I'm Chris William, and we hope you stay safe. Good night now.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by High Point University, Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Sonoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you.